I remember 2007 going to Barcelona to test at the end of the season, and Michael Schumacher was there testing for Ferrari. All of a sudden, I'm driving down the pit lane, and Michael is the car in front of me as I drive down the pit lane. You realize what an amazing day that was.
Only 2 Indians out of 1.2 billion have made it to the pinnacle of motorsport, Formula One. And it's a privilege to have him with us here today at Man's Life, Karun Chandhok, the first Indian to race at the iconic Le Mans 24 Hours, the first Indian to win an event in GP2 and stand on the top step of a podium on a Grand Prix weekend, the first Indian to race in Formula E. And he's got the unenviable position of having to answer every one of his little brother's questions today. Karun Chandhok, welcome to Man's Life for your year in sport. So Karun, you're known as the encyclopedia of Formula One in the F1 circuit and along the F1 paddock, but would love to understand from you, do you think there's one year in sport that can elevate the career of a motorsportsman or woman?
I think, every driver has, or rider, in fact, in motorcycle racing, have peaks and troughs in sport in their career. There are certain elements that can be a catalyst to change your trajectory. Sometimes people have a very linear graph where they just keep progressing all the way through, and then they get to a point where they plateau and dip off. But that's quite rare. And I think there are always elements in a person's career in sport where something happens, an event happens, a tournament happens, a race happens in our case, or a championship happens, or a deal happens, in fact, which helps really transform your trajectory.
Yeah, we're going to jump into that just a bit. But what year do you think changed your life, not just as a racing driver, but as a person as well?
I would probably say 2007, to give you a bit of background. I had been racing in Formula 3 and then went back to Asia to race in the Renault V6 series, which I won in Asia that year. But at the end of that season, there was no sponsorship, there was no funding to carry on forward. You remember I was back home in India and we were running around trying to get a budget together to progress. At that stage, I got very lucky that Red Bull offered me a place on their driver program, the young driver program, and put a load of money into my GP2 season. And I was the last driver to get a seat on the grid for GP2. But I ended up having quite a good season, scored points in every round in the second half, won a race at Spa. And that really course-corrected my career path, because at the end of 2006, it could have well and truly have stopped. And my driving days would have been finished basically at that point. So, I think that the fact that I managed to get back into a high level of racing in Europe and, get a level of success out of that season was a massive, massive game changer for my life.
Yeah, just take us back to that season, because like you said, I remember it at home, the stress on you, the stress on everyone around you in some sense as well, because I think many don't understand motorsport isn't just a sport, it's a business as well. But the build up to that season, not knowing where you were going to be, not knowing what your plans were going to be, what was that like mentally to even approach a season of racing?
It's not easy because, the winter is the time you need to be training and your motivation needs to be high. But when you don't have a deal in place and you don't have a goal that you're specifically training for, it's quite difficult. And mentally as well to, go through a winter of unknowings and not really confident that you will carry on a driving career made it very difficult to find the motivation to go and train and to keep believing that the journey will carry on. You're absolutely right. It's often underestimated. And that's the biggest barrier for drivers from India, right? The biggest barrier is going out there and getting the money and the backing that you need to carry on this path towards Formula One.
Yeah, I think you hear of so many families in motorsport mortgaging their homes, their paintings, their everything else to put their son or daughter through a career in motorsport as well. And that is the reality of the sport. The impact of testing, therefore, can you just explain that to some of the fans in India? Because I think we don't quite understand how different it would be had you got mileage under your belt versus the others who did.
In a nutshell, it's basically practice. Obviously, motor racing is a very capital-intensive sport, and the only way you can get the practice in is really by driving the race car. But to drive a race car and to run the race car is very expensive. It costs, a lot of money in terms of the engines, the fuel, the people, the engineering personnel, the tires, all of that costs money. So every day you do costs a lot of money. And therefore, if you've got more financial support, you can do more. And, I think it's quite a simple equation, really, in terms of, speed costs money. How fast do you want to go?
Yeah, that is the reality of it. You talked about how Red Bull came in and had an influence on that year, but Bernie Ecclestone also had a bit of an impact on your career in 2007. Just tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, Bernie was a huge support when it was all looking a little bit tricky in 2000. At the end of 2006, we called him up and he arranged a GP2 test for me with Campos at the end of 2006, and then he did the deal for 2007. He did the deal with Durango, the team for 2007. He, made the introduction to Red Bull. He was certainly a key element in terms of us getting a place on the grid, and can't thank him enough for that.
Yeah, and then you went on to your first win in GP2, the first Indian to do so. Indian National Anthem playing on a Grand Prix weekend for the first time as well. What was that moment like to win at the iconic Spa-Francorchamps and hear that national anthem? I mean, I remember tears on your face, tears on my face, mom's face, dad's face, and everyone around you. But what was that moment like for you?
It's a mixture. I think anytime you have a big moment like that, it's a mixture of relief as much as joy. As soon as you can deliver a result like that on a world stage, it underlines your credibility, and that gives you a sense of relief. I think, there's obviously joy because there's joy of winning and joy of success, but that's the same in any sport. But yeah. I think on that occasion, there was very much, a sense of relief as well.
Just take us back to that weekend, Karun, because you made an outstanding move on the last lap of that race. How much adrenaline was pumping through it? We talk about sportsmen and women being in the zone. Was that sort of something you felt right through that weekend?
I think there was momentum coming into that weekend. Going back a little bit earlier, we had a race in Turkey, which I should have won. I'm trying to remember. It's been a while now since that race, but I think I started on the front row and I was running second basically for the whole race. And then, but my plan all along was to make sure that, I play the long game and make sure I had tires in a good condition towards the end of the race. And I could see the guy leading, Andy Soucek, he was going the opposite. He was, more attacking early, and I could see him eating up his tires. And I just thought, okay, I remember my plan was always to wait for the last few laps. And it worked out. He ate up his tires too soon. And then towards the end, I was able to eventually catch him and pass him. So, I think it's a mental game as much as a physical sport. You have to strategize. You have to think and use your head as much as your body to drive the car.
Yeah, you picked 2007 as the year in sport for you, Karun. How much did life change for you after 2007?
It made a big difference because towards the end of that year, then I was able to keep the support from Red Bull, and it opened the door for another absolute game changer, which was I got my first chance to test a Formula One car. That's for any young racing driver, one of the big boxes you want to tick is driving an F1 car. That's what you all dream of doing ever since you were a kid. I remember 2007 going to Barcelona to test at the end of the season, and Michael Schumacher was there testing for Ferrari. And Michael, was one of my childhood heroes. We had posters in our bedroom wall and all sorts. And all of a sudden, I'm driving down the pit lane, and Michael is the car in front of me as I drive down the pit lane. You realize what an amazing day that was. So yeah, I think a lot of positives came out of 2007.
Well, Karun, you earned the respect of the Formula One paddock that day. You had the tricolour flying high on the F1 podium, and it's a day that you've now taken us back to, and it's a year that we will remember fondly as well. Thanks so much, Karun, for joining us on Man's Life for your year in sport.
Thank you.
So that was the encyclopedia on Formula One. Karun Chandhok joining us on Man's Life for his year in sport. But for more great content, head across to manslife.in for everything from the world of sport, auto, lifestyle, and entertainment.